Continuing the trend, I've made quite a few Pokemon videos as of late, and I've made quite a few before Sword and Shield was even announced. In doing that, I've accumulated quite a bit of Pokemon fan comments, all requesting different things for the future of Pokemon. So I thought it would be a good idea to start a series of videos that references those comments in an attempt to make the ultimate Pokemon game, starting from each point of making a game. This will all culminate into the ultimate Pokemon game video at the end of all of it. Today we're going to start with the thing that always is going to make its first impression, the graphics. What would the perfect Pokemon game look like? What should it look like? Let's talk about that. The thing about Pokemon is it sports a massive fan base made up of all sorts of perspectives that all vary from person to person. Everyone wants something different, so to represent that as accurately as possible, I'm going to present three distinct opinions on the topic. Two extremes that want change, and one opinion that Pokemon should remain as unchanged as possible. So in terms of art style, the two extremes I've seen persist on this topic are: one, an art style based in realism akin to Pokémon Tournament, or more recently Detective Pikachu, or even the promotional trailers for Pokemon cards in Sword and Shield. And two, the one that I personally lean toward, an art style that's more cartoon-esque, whether that be something similar to the art style shown in the Pokemon Origins, Generations, or even main series anime, or the original promotional art style that Ken Sugimori created for the original Gen 1 and Gen 2 games. Then obviously the third perspective would be to maintain the current art style like Sword and Shield currently does. I want to know what you guys want to see most, so vote in the poll, the outcome of which will determine the art style we use for this perfect Pokemon game video that will be decided by the fans. Linked up above, and let me know in the comments down below. Okay, so what are the pros and cons of each art style? Starting with a more realistic take. I'd say the pros of the realistic art style is that if done right, it could be a showcase of what Switch is capable of on a technical level, much in the way Pokemon Stadium games used to be. Obviously, Nintendo Switch isn't in the same position as N64. That was the most technologically advanced console on the market at the time, so it was easier to produce games that were showpieces. That said, I do think Switch can still benefit from games with technical prowess in mind. Not so much to say, look at how much better we look than the other guys, but rather to say, look at how much closer we can get to them than you thought we could. That said, a con of an art style like this is that they have clear expiration dates. No matter what they do, next generation, a game that looks like this would be dated. It happens all the time with games designed like that. It's the reason why people are saying PS3 level performance on a tablet looks bad, and it will be the reason why a game that looks like Cyberpunk 2077 in the year 2077 would be laughed out of the room. I think another pro for a realistic art style is, for some, it could be more immersive, being that it's easier for them to place themselves into a world that looks closer to the one we live in. Also, for some, a realistic art style would legitimize the game in a sense. A through line I've noticed with this section of the Pokemon fan base is the idea that Pokemon games should be growing with them, in the same way that Naughty Dog as a studio says they wanted to grow up with their audience. A realistic art style to this portion of the fan base would be a sign of a more mature game, and as an extension, a more legitimate one. A game that isn't just a toy or a child's plaything or whatever.
You are a toy!
To me, this is also a con, because it feels a lot like the gritty reboots we would get during the 360 era. Did anybody ask for an adult Bomberman? Because we got one, and it didn't exactly make it more appealing, not only for adults, but anyone. I think this idea is misguided because it purports that an art style can be irrevocably assigned to an age group. Kids entertainment has to be animated, adult entertainment has to be live action, and any crossover is unacceptable. I think the art style used should be the one that's best for the hardware. I want to be able to go back to this game in 10 years and still be impressed by its visuals in the way I'm still impressed in Yoshi's Island's visuals or Wind Waker's visuals. It's for that reason that I'm more in favor of the second art style, a cartoon-esque one. So what are the pros of an animated art style? Well, off the bat, ironically, I think it would be a lot less divisive. Every Pokemon fan on some level identifies with the animated designs of Pokemon from the respective respective generations. We've all consumed animated media at some point for Pokemon. I think making the shift to a more aggressively animation-inspired art style would work out in the same way other games that took that approach have. In my personal experience, people have seen me playing through Naruto Ultimate Ninja Storm or the Ubisoft published South Park games and took a major double take to confirm that I wasn't watching the shows they're associated with, but rather playing a video game. I think this could work wonders for all players involved for that reason. It would be a showpiece in the same way a realistic art style would be, only this way it could remain timeless while doing so. Older fans are nostalgic for it, and obviously kids will identify with it, especially if they're currently consuming Pokemon in other mediums. A potential con here though would have to be the fact that just like realistic art styles, animated or cel-shaded art styles aren't all created equally. These art styles could easily look dated as well if not done properly. Cel shading in particular has had varying results as far as I see it. A lot of it looks great to this day, but there are certainly examples to the contrary. In regards to specifically a hand-drawn art style, that could easily bring with it the con of having a bloated development cycle. Animated movies have a fraction of the needed animation in a 20+ hour long video game with hundreds if not thousands of characters that would all need to be accounted for. And that's before mentioning that these films often have much larger budgets and teams of dedicated animators, whereas games tend to cost a lot less to produce, and due to the fact that game development requires more skill sets than movies do, they don't have as many people that sole responsibility is to animate for 3 years leading up to the game's release. Of course, gaming as a medium has developed its own workarounds for problems like this. They could do a Dragon Ball FighterZ styled hack where they cel shade it in 3D but angle the game's camera in a way that gives the impression of it being a 2D animation. Another pro that comes to mind is the increased flexibility they would have with battle animations. Visually, of course, it would definitely be a harder job to go about doing it in a 2D animation style, but in a perfect world, it would be cool to see what crazy animations they could come up with. Also, they'd need to be more tailored to each individual Pokemon than they currently are, so no more battle animations of blasts of water flying out of the wrong part of a Pokemon. That said, obviously the con I just mentioned is the reason why a hand-drawn style would be next to impossible, but it would be awesome. That's all I'm saying. Realistically, they'd have to go the cel-shaded route, which, like the aforementioned Dragon Ball FighterZ and Ultimate Ninja Storm art styles, could look equally as cool. Finally, and I can't believe I'm saying this given some of the comments I've received before the announcement of Pokemon Sword and Shield and the National Dex fiasco, the least popular scenario, keeping the art style as is. I say least popular not because I don't think people like the current art style, but rather because I think losing the National Dex would be an easier pill to swallow if the improvements made to the art were easier to quantify. As it stands, people are going through every animation with a fine-tooth comb looking for any reused assets so they can scream about how lazy Game Freak is on their Twitter accounts. With a new art style, even if they reuse some of the animations, it would be a lot harder to argue they spent all of their time and money doing nothing. You would immediately be able to see an improvement they made that's more than just a boost to resolution and detail in the game world. This isn't to say I agree with the notion that Game Freak reusing animations is lazy or anything like that. Animation takes a lot of time and effort. Even the things that you may assume to be simple would take thousands of man-hours to accomplish on the scale that Game Freak needs to execute them. I'm sure many of you have seen those videos people have posted where they nitpick a single animation and redo it as if it's an equivalent process. I want to be very clear that I fundamentally disagree with the sentiment. Every time literally anyone tries to do what Game Freak does with Pokemon, or better, it ends up lacking something. So I think it's important to underscore that while Game Freak isn't perfect, they clearly know what they're doing. They know a hell of a lot more than the fans complaining about the work they do. Also, it's worth noting that you'd be hard pressed to find a company in game development that doesn't reuse assets on some level. That's just a fact of life, and it always has been. But I digress, sort of. That kind of was one potential con to maintaining the same art style, but there is a pro to maintaining it as well. And I think it's because of the, again, in my opinion, trite adage, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. At this point, the art style is tried and true, and changing it could be off-putting to some. Also, the other pro, mostly for Game Freak, yes, but it's a lot more cost-effective to stick with this art style. Little known fact, despite the perception of a lot of Pokemon fans, the video games aren't the center of the Pokemon universe in terms of pure revenue generated, so it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to dump all of their money into making improvements with a questionable payoff. This way, they don't need to bet the bank on every release base, and we still get a style we've proven to enjoy on some level. So that's all three scenarios as I see them, but what do you think? Which art style would you prefer? Leave your answer in the poll and in the comments below to decide what the theoretical art style would be of our perfect Pokemon game video. Did I miss any potential pros and cons of any of the three art styles that were listed in this video? Are there any art styles that I'm completely missing out on? Again, leave them in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to click that like button and share it with a friend that you think may enjoy it as well. Also, don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell for new videos like this every Tuesday and Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. New podcast every 10 a.m. Eastern Time on Saturdays, different channel, directly to you, linked on the end card. Okay, that's it for me. See you next week.